sedimentation is when something settles, right? And the one thing settles like layered on top of the other. So if you look at geological sedimentation, you find layers of different colored soils, for example. And so the notion of sedimented time is really that sort of, you have time and then another time settles on it and another time settles on it and another time settles on it and another time settles on it. So you end up with these sort of layers of time, but also with sedimentation. It also like flows into the previous layers, and the layers beneath also influence the layers above.
British Academy Time to the Just Transition project is a big global convening programme. We're bringing together researchers from all around the world, so we have people from 6 different continents, we've got people from 14 different disciplines, and what we're trying to do is 2 things. One is we're trying to figure out the role that time plays, and by time that means timing mechanisms, rhythms, temporal stories, the role that that plays in creating justice or injustice in sustainability transitions. And the second thing we're trying to do is to figure out, can we develop tools, diagnostics, resources for people to think about time so that other folks can use these ideas about time and justice to really understand and get into what's happening in sustainability transitions. We've developed this methodology called the TimeLab for this project to bring a group of scholars together to look at a particular place through lots of different temporal lenses.
It gives concentrated space, a TimeLab, to think into time in a particular space. So I thought, okay, we could do a TimeLab in Cape Town. There was a lot of richness in the historicity, the landscape, the people, the cultures, the contemporary challenges, as well as the historical. To begin to really think into the space, I needed to spend time here to think about where we could host our international friends and colleagues to come and do this work around exploring time in relation to the land's history, the people's histories, and also the contemporary issues that we're all struggling with when we think about just transitioning.
So I was involved working with Halo, setting the TimeLab up, and involved in thinking through what it would mean for a bunch of international scholars from all over the world to be in South Africa specifically looking at time. I think the idea of facilitating it very carefully is important. Having a variety of carefully thought through processes, talks, presentations, visits to various places is really important to sort of trigger conversations, and I think that it's crucial also to leave those gaps where things can emerge from that.
So we came and spent time here. We then just started to walk the streets and sense what was happening. And so we started to think, what do you find in a space when it comes to concepts of temporalities? So we found these sort of sedimented layers of temporalities that have been there, since the beginning of time. The mountain itself is an ancient phenomenon. As the continents split, this mountain kind of emerged from the sea. And then the water that came from the mountain was really what was the sort of heart of early settlements, the first peoples that were living here. And then of course there was the Cape, which is the route for the early Portuguese explorers, and then the Dutch East India Company and the trade routes between Europe and the East. And the Cape became a settlement. It was the first colonial settlement in Africa, or at least this part of Africa. There's also, of course, the old statues, there's loads of them. Mostly like these big white men, like Cecil John Rhodes, who had the audacity to say that your hinterland is there and just pointing across the continent, that he then subsequently led the colonization of. And that was the sort of icon in the Rhodes Must Fall protests that we've recently had in the universities, which was about, decolonizing our institutions, and that's so many years later.
What is it, the name?
It's called the Yesterday, Today and Tomorrow. This is our time flower. I didn't want to do a time lab that was about, linear history. History is never linear. I came across this really lovely piece of work by the Rap Collective, and they were talking about presence sensing. And I just thought, oh wow, this is really what's going to work for this TimeLab, because it brings past and future together in the present, and it gives you this sense of present is being very strong and important in the now. And what is the now? And then what is the relationship between past and future? And how does it kind of churn itself into the present?
For me, it becomes very interesting to think about presence sensing. My sort of metaphor in all of this work is, in fact, the idea of the camera itself, where the aperture where the light comes in is a very, very small opening. And the world, in the form of light, enters the aperture. And there's a sense then that perhaps what comes out inside the camera on the other side is partly our own projection about what the future might be. But it's interesting to try and inhabit that space of the aperture, which is kind of chaotic and contains everything of the present and of the past. It pulls them together.
We've had our democracy in 1994, and at the entrance to this historical garden is a kind of beautiful sculpture which was to mark the 1994 Constitution, first ever democratic election in the country. And you can walk over it as you walk into the garden, and it was interesting to me too, because 30 years later some of those pieces have been eroded, they've disappeared. And then right next door to that is the Slave Lodge. And the Slave Lodge carries its own story, because without the slaves, the Dutch East India Company couldn't have established the colony. But of course, the slaves and their stories were erased from memory and from history during the apartheid era. That's been recovered, through memorialization and establishment of the Slave Lodge and its museum space. When you're looking at it from today, for example, the old slave bell is there, and that was like one of the first instruments used to control time and control people's time and movement. So it's just such a confluence of so many different cycles of time that kind of flow into each other and that are sedimented but are also loosened as you begin to look into the space and you begin to see so many contradictions, so many stories, so many hidden stories, so many visible stories. So we opened all of this up in the TimeLab as a sort of like a space for people to just think into sedimented time in a place where you don't necessarily come from, but you can still sense, the complexities of temporality, and then think about what that means in relation to concepts of justice. We then encouraged people to, walk out. We gave them a little booklet about these different places, and we gave them some clues, and we said, well, you could kind of do this route or that route or that route. Or you can literally just walk into the company garden and spend time with the old pear tree and present sense. We also took people to Ixhesha, and we looked at people trying to grow food there on the Cape Flats. Through the apartheid separatist development, they moved most of the black and coloured people onto the Cape Flats. And it's an area where there's very low productivity in the soil because it's sea sand. And yet we have the sort of, capturing of the freshwater source and the land here for food growing for the early settlement. The idea was that we would come back and reflect on what we'd seen and people's perceptions of the sedimented time that we were trying to work with, and then also how they were sensing it in the present. And also how other people were sensing, their lives in the present. So it was also about those interactions with other people in the landscape.
And whose hand writes time? And whose eye tells time? And whose money makes time? And whose breath broke time? And whose clock stole time? And whose God wrote time into this frightened straight line? The daughter tells us the plants are out of time with their pollinators. The animals are mating out of time. But the land doesn't have time, she has rhythm. The elders have been telling us this all week. The Kamensa grandmothers in Tabarnak, Marquet and Umlume in Cape Town, the Sami in Sweden, Kongolan on the mountainside in Jamaica. The elders still remember how to listen to the land's rhythm. But in the thick present of now, and just now, whose policies broke generational time, polluting the continuous river, elevating one generation above the next, to a now where our children can't touch down in the right order and have forgotten that to feed our elders is sacred. The cyclical is only breathless because we live outside it. I hold a cycle in my body. Every month, my body creates new life, just as every spring the land creates new buds, new seeds, but you see only death. And death is here within me too. Every month, my body sheds what has grown and died, just as every autumn the land sheds dead leaves and old growth. 360 senses to dance back and forth across this continuum of life. It matters whose eyes tell time. It matters whose words create worlds, because the land doesn't speak, she sings. And we have forgotten how to listen for the song of her call. We have forgotten how to respond with the music of our bodies, to sync again with her rhythm. So what have we learned here this week? At the foot of this mountain, who once stood under the sea, this ancient keeper of time and memory, what have you learned here? And what responsibility will we take for these worlds created by the words of our ancestors? And what discomfort will you bear to welcome worlds not of your making? Every word we speak imbues the now with an energy, a frequency. The thick now determines the just now. That is to say, the present is always future. That is to say, we walk backwards into our futures because our ancestors can see over our shoulders, like my grandfather standing here at my left speaking these words. And who walks with you? And can you hear their words that created the now we are living? And what is the rhythm of your responsibility? 7 degrees higher in 1 century. If we keep playing with boiling water, we will burn. 7 generations for the Kayatau people to get back their land. How many more generations to get back to rhythm? If we keep using these masters' tools, we will never dismantle this time prison they built. Will you listen to the emerald green sunbird, to the reindeer, to the deep water's rage, to the weaver's nest, to the southeaster's breath? Will you ask the flowers why their rhythm is changing? Will you ask the female of the species why she is responding differently to the males? Are you willing to put down the emergency of your urgency and slow down long enough to merge the past and the future into sa, long enough to listen deeply for the yam's inherited knowledge?
I think that people left with a different sense of how time worked and how time might work, and how different ways of looking at time shifts things and shifts themselves and shifts their relationship with other people. I think it was really interesting for that.
A just transition can be thought about as something simple on paper. It's like it's here and there. There's a movement from this point to that one. And quite often it's framed as though it's a sort of an event. There's a before and an after, and something happens. And what a TimeLab does is it kind of explodes that event and shows all the different temporal processes that are ongoing at any one time. The other thing with a TimeLab is it's incredibly motivating, This is no longer just a theoretical idea. We're here, we're in the place. So what does that mean for me as a researcher in terms of my responsibilities, my accountability? How do I then act in the world once I've been here, seen it, felt it, touched it?
It gives you the space to sense time and to do that present sensing and to think about past, present, futures, the intertwining of them, what they mean in relation to other concepts like justice or community or healing processes. You know, you can take a TimeLab into many different dimensions, and I think that that's where its real possibility lies.
Over the next 2 days, I'm going to be reliving this moment, thinking about all the questions you asked me, and thinking about what I should have said. That's when the interview is going to actually take place, when there's no camera around. I'm not even here. This is an illusion.